Hey there. Today we are jumping back into the listing agreement, and we stopped yesterday at line 153 on page 4. So we're going to jump in at this line 154 on page 4, paragraph 12. All right, so the disclosure of condition of property. So this paragraph says that basically the seller has to honestly report and disclose anything, any defects, any information about the property that they know. And that is required by the state of Illinois. There are some disclosures that Illinois requires. That would be the Illinois residential real property disclosure, the lead-based paint disclosure if the property was built before 1978, and then the radon disclosure. Those are the three that the state of Illinois would require. So this paragraph here just states that the seller will complete those disclosures and they will be honest in the disclosure of that information. So the lead-based paint disclosure, properties that were built prior to 1978, you need to mark this is box. Properties built after 1978, you need to mark this is not box. Excuse me. So the lead-based paint disclosure would need to be completed again for homes built prior to 1978. Personally, I include a lead-based paint disclosure in all of my listings, and here's why. Commercial grade or industrial grade paint does include lead. How many people have brought stuff home from the work site and used it in their home? So it's possible that there's lead-based paint in any home, regardless of it being built after 1978. Now, this is not Illinois law. This is not a requirement at Keller Williams Marquis, but I just want to provide that little tidbit of wisdom that it is possible. So I always do a lead-based paint disclosure regardless. You don't have to, but it's a good idea in my opinion. All right, minimum services. That states that as the agent that you will accept delivery of and present all offers to the seller, that you will assist the seller in developing communication in regard to those offers, that you will help negotiate through the transaction, and then that you will answer their questions that are relevant, help with counter offers, and then the contingencies and all of that. So those are the minimum services that you provide. Of course, as realtors, we do so much more than that. So that just is a legality of information to the seller from Keller Williams Marquis that those are the things that we absolutely will do as required by law. Earnest money. Okay, so the earnest money, it's not a huge situation at the onset of a listing, well, except for in these days where properties are selling the same day. But earnest money is held in an escrow account. It cannot be released until all parties are in agreement on how it is to be dispersed. So this earnest money paragraph just lets the seller know that all earnest money is held in an escrow account, and it does have to be agreed upon by all parties before it's released. Okay, the disclaimer. This paragraph here protects us as realtors. We are not inspectors. We are not attorneys. Our profession is a realtor. And so the seller cannot expect us to have expertise in other fields. We may have knowledge, we may have wisdom, and we can share that knowledge, but always preface it. I'm not an attorney, I'm not a contractor, I'm not an inspector. That is not my area of expertise. I'm your realtor, and my job is to gather the data and analyze your property and then market it and promote it, sell it, to get you the most value that you can get out of your home, right? Okay, so then we come down to governmental inspections and occupancy permit. When you list a property, if you're not familiar with that municipality, I strongly encourage you, contact the building and zoning department or whatever department in that municipality that handles their occupancy inspections. You can go to the website, you can call them, somehow connect with them, find out their process, their policy. Most municipalities, if they have a website, they have their list of requirements for governmental occupancy available on their website. So you can go to that, you can print it out, or you can save it as a document and share it with your seller so that they're aware of the occupancy requirements for that municipality. Hit it head on so that it's not a surprise later when you have to have that occupancy inspection performed, right? Costs vary. Most municipalities in our area, the seller does have to order the inspection, pay for the inspection. There are a couple where the buyer does that. So again, that's a detail you want to clarify prior to your listing appointment if possible. So then there are deadlines in the contract. So in the event you have a purchase contract and the property does not pass the occupancy inspection, so the permit's not issued, then there are 7 days after the receipt of the inspection report for you to decide, or you and the buyer to decide in writing who's going to do the repairs or negotiate whether the seller is going to provide occupancy or not. That is a legal reason the buyer could terminate if the seller is not going to provide occupancy and there are repairs required. So you want to educate your seller. It's in their best interest to provide occupancy to the buyer. There are properties sold as is and no repair, and in those marketing remarks, you want to put buyer responsible for occupancy permit. You want to communicate that openly because, again, a lot of municipalities require the seller to order that inspection. So that's not something the buyer has their hands on until that inspection and report is produced. So again, if no written agreement is reached, either party may terminate after 10 days of negotiating. So and then, in bold, buyer is cautioned not to rely on the occupancy regulations, but should also satisfy him or herself otherwise as to the condition of the property. In other words, this would be an education moment for your seller. Let your seller know that the buyer will probably have home inspections, and that is their right to have inspections opposite of the occupancy. So, and there will be things the buyer probably will ask to have repaired outside of that occupancy inspection. So again, just educate your seller that they are required most likely to have the occupancy inspection. Again, verify that with the municipality. And then the buyer has the option of having additional inspections and requesting additional repairs. Use of listing content and intellectual property license. So this paragraph 18, I'm going to really summarize it quick. Basically, it means you're going to produce photographs, marketing material, marketing remarks, maybe a cute caption or a great presentation of the property, right? That property is yours. The seller cannot charge you for that property because it's your creative allowance, right? It's your baby. So yes, it's using their home, but they have given you the right to market the home. So they can't come back and charge you or Keller Williams Marquis for the material that you create to market their property. All right, now on to paragraph 19. So internet data exchange. This option A says, I have advised my designated agent that I do not want the listed property to be displayed on the internet. Your seller does not want that, most likely. That would severely limit the buyer pool. It would be like having a for sale by owner sign in the yard and that's it, right? They're hiring a realtor to professionally market their property. Surely they want to expand their buyer pool and have the property online, marketed online. I understand there are really, really far in between situations where maybe there's a specific reason why that seller can't have the property online. So just have that discussion openly, candidly with your seller. But the advice would be that obviously they would limit their buyer pool and limit your ability to market the property by not having it online. Option B, I have advised my designated agent that I do not want the address of the listed property to be displayed on the internet. again, buyers are going to want to know the address so they can go by the house, so they can see where it's located. Is it in you can see what the school district through the marketing material, but without the address being posted, the area would be unknown. So again, if it's not a really, really specific reason, then I would encourage the seller to include the address. Option C, I have advised my designated agent that I have elected to not allow third-party comments, reviews, or hyperlinks. So that option C, if you say there's somebody online and they're wanting to comment on the house, oh, that's so cute, or I used to live next door, or hey, I wonder if, right? So how many times have agents been contacted because of third-party comments? Somebody has a question about the property. Somebody wants to schedule a showing for the property. Somebody has a question about the neighborhood. It allows conversation and it drives attention to the seller's listing. So again, if there's no arch enemy out there to sabotage the seller, allow those third-party comments, because it does drive business to the listing. And then option D, I have advised my designated agent that I have elected not to allow the automated estimate of the market value of the listing or hyperlink to such estimate. So that would be like the Zestimate on Zillow, right? Or similar sites. Again, I always encourage my sellers to allow that. Buyers are savvy today. They know that those numbers are there. And so if they're blocked or hidden, then it raises the question. And immediately the buyer thinks that the seller is being deceitful, hiding information, not being fully disclosed in the public information that's out there. So again, I always encourage my seller to allow those. Buyers are savvy enough to know those numbers aren't 100% accurate. When they first came out, there was a lot of confusion about that. And I know as a realtor, I've fought my battles with that information. But these days, there's enough information out there that buyers know that maybe isn't quite the most accurate number anyway. And that's why they've hired you to represent them, right? If it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith out there, just a regular homeowner out to sell their home, want it marketed and sold easily and quickly, then I would say encourage them to allow all of these options. Don't check any of those boxes, in other words. But you'll have to have that discussion with your seller, because this is information that they are agreeing to. So have that discussion with them through each of those options. Okay, paragraph 20, mediation arbitration. This paragraph talks about if your seller endures some kind of a loss, or they want to place a claim based on some form of loss in the process of the listing. Now, this isn't typical, but obviously it's happened because it's in our contract, and that's exactly how I present it to my sellers. If it's a loss under $5,000, and again, it depends on the jurisdiction, it depends on the location, so you don't even need to quote those dollar amounts necessarily, because they do vary from county to county, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you want to just have this conversation. Somebody somewhere along the lines has suffered a loss. Depending on the jurisdiction that we're in, it would either qualify as a small claims loss, or it would go into the mediation or arbitration legal process. And so if you would suffer a loss, this paragraph discusses that process. And again, I reassure my sellers that it's not typical, but it could happen, and so this language here protects them. If you want further explanation of that, we can definitely dive into that, but that is the way I present this information. Initials here by the sellers. We move on to page 7. So remedies upon default. This would be, we have a legal agreement. This is a contract. We have dates, right? If the seller is unhappy with your service as a realtor, they may say, hey, I want out of this agreement. Now, it is a legal binding contract, so they are bound to the terms of the contract. If for some reason they feel like there is a default, they can communicate that with you. They can contact me and we can figure out a solution or a remedy. It may be that the seller isn't holding up their end of the deal. Remember the things that they are required to do way back in, what page was that on? Let's flip back for a moment. The seller it's page 3. Seller further agrees. If they're not holding up their end of the deal with these things that we discussed the other day, well, then you have the right to terminate the listing. In my experience, I've only terminated one listing, and that was because she canceled appointments when we were on her doorstep several times, and including open houses. And so it was impossible for me to market the property and, let alone the money that I wasted on advertising for events and open houses and such. So she was agreeable. She terminated. So this paragraph here just helps walk through that process if needed. Not typical, most folks, we realtors are providing their services, and sellers are doing their responsibilities, and it ends up in hopefully a happy situation. But all right, notices. All notices have to be in writing. Electronic copies are okay. That's number 23. 24, entirety of the agreement. You can't pull out one sentence here or one word there. It is start to finish, page 1 to page 8. It's the entire agreement. There are no amendments unless obviously one is presented in writing. If it's in writing and it has the MLS number, the address, the altering terms, it would have the seller's signature and my signature as managing broker, then that amendment would stand. Otherwise, it doesn't. If a seller writes an amendment and it's just in the seller, even if they present it to you, if it's not signed by me also, then it is not an amendment. Likewise, if you create an amendment and the seller hasn't signed it, that's not an amendment to the contract. It has to have both signatures, seller and managing broker. Governing law. The terms shall be interpreted subject to and governed by the laws of the state of Illinois. The construction, the words of gender used in the agreement shall be held and construed to include any other gender, or words in the singular shall be held in plural, and vice versa unless the context requires otherwise. The binding effect is for the benefit of all parties, their heirs, representatives. If a person dies during the listing, unfortunately, then these terms would stand through into the estate or the administration of that estate. Agent interest. So if you have an interest, either directly or indirectly, in the sale of this property, you have to put your name here, okay? What that means is, like, it could be your mom's house. It could be your cousin's house. It could be that you have partial interest. Maybe it's you're involved in the LLC or something of the seller. You would have to put your name here, okay? Then your addenda. You need the addendum R, that's the residential real property disclosure. You will need the lead-based paint disclosure if it's built before 1978, the lockbox authorization, the radon disclosure, and then in our office we do an additional addendum and it's called the square footage disclosure. So you would write that in here, square footage disclosure. Special agreements, not always a special agreement in a listing agreement, but if there are, you can write that information here. If there are none, you would put NA or X's or dashes or something to communicate that that doesn't apply to this contract. If you put your name up here as agent interest, then a lot of times in special agreements, you would put whatever your interest is in the property here. Maybe the property's agent owned, you own it, then you would put that information here. Maybe it's your mother's home, you would put that information here. So that information does need to be in the listing agreement. But again, not typical for special agreements in a listing agreement. Sometimes the seller may have a showing restriction. Maybe they're going on vacation and they don't want showings during the vacation. Then you can write that information here as a block out for showing time. Put the dates in here. Initials here. We go on to page 8, very short, half page. Signature of the seller. If there are two sellers, signature of the other seller. You will know who to get a signature from by looking at the tax records. So when you pulled up the tax records to investigate about the property and gather the parcel ID number, the legal description, and all of that information, you'll see who's on title and you'll see where the tax bill is mailed. So that will give you information about the seller even prior to your listing appointment. So that's how you know who needs to sign the listing agreement, whomever's on the tax bill. So signatures here, then the printed seller's name on line 339. Then in these two blanks are the seller's address. It can be different addresses, not a big deal. So the seller addresses go there, and then the phone number for each one, the email address for each one, and then you sign here as the designated agent. If you are co-listing the property, then your co-lister would sign here, and then I sign as managing broker over here and I date it. And then seller initials go down at the bottom. That is the listing agreement. Now I do want to impress upon you, if my signature is not here and you have not delivered the fully signed with my signature document to your seller, it is not binding with the seller. So you need to get my signature on here after all of that's completed. So seller has signed, you have signed, then I sign and date, and then you need to provide a copy to your seller. Then it's a legal binding contract. Okay? So I know that's a ton of information. We've had a couple days going through the listing agreement. Tina, Pam, and I are here for any questions you have about this document. So reach out to us. We look forward to hearing from you.